My mother-in-law stood up at my divorce hearing and told the judge I was an unfit parent. Guardian ad litem opened her folder and asked if she'd like to reconsider her statement. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Diana Okafor. I was married to Marcus Okafor for 7 years. We have 2 children. Zoe is 6 and James is 4. They are the reason I am telling this story carefully, with precision, without the anger I am still entitled to feel and have chosen not to lead with, because anger is not useful in a courtroom, and I spent 18 months learning to think in courtrooms. Marcus's mother is a woman named Beverly Okafor, 63 years old, retired school administrator, church deacon, the kind of woman who enters a room and immediately begins reorganizing it, not physically, though sometimes physically, but socially, in terms of who knows what and who is positioned where, and whose version of events becomes the one the room operates on. She had been reorganizing the story of my marriage for 4 years before I filed for divorce. I didn't understand that clearly until I was sitting in my attorney's office with a yellow legal pad and 18 months of notes, and my attorney looked at me and said, "Diana, the problem isn't Marcus. Marcus is the symptom. Beverly is the system." I sat with that for a long time. She was right. I need to tell you about the marriage before I tell you about the hearing, because the hearing only makes sense inside the marriage, and the marriage only makes sense inside Beverly. Marcus and I met when I was 29. He was warm and funny and devoted in the specific way of men who have been raised by a very strong woman and have learned that devotion is the currency that keeps the peace. He was devoted to me the way he was devoted to Beverly, completely and in a way that left very little room for the distinction between the two. That's not a criticism of Marcus. It took me years to understand that what I was watching was not weakness but conditioning, and that those are different things, and that understanding the difference matters if you want to be precise about what happened and why. Beverly had opinions about everything: where we lived, how we spent money, how I cooked, cleaned, worked, dressed, parented. She delivered these opinions in the specific soft language of women who have learned that directness creates resistance, and that concern sounds identical to control if you deploy it carefully enough. She was never cruel to my face. I want to be precise about that. To my face, she was warm, attentive, generous with her time and occasionally with her money. She brought food when the children were born. She called every Sunday. She told me regularly that she loved me like a daughter. What she said about me when I wasn't in the room was a different language entirely. I found out slowly, and then all at once, the way you find out most things that have been true for a long time before you had access to them. The first piece was a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. Marcus on the back porch, voice low, Beverly on the other end. I caught fragments through the screen door. She doesn't appreciate what she has. I've always said she was difficult. Marcus, you deserve someone who puts the family first. I stood in my kitchen and held very still. I filed it. I didn't confront. I started paying attention differently. Over the next 8 months, I kept a note in my phone, not dramatically, just carefully. Dates, context, exact words where I could get them. My sister-in-law, Marcus's younger sister Patrice, told me in confidence over coffee one afternoon that Beverly had been telling the extended family for 2 years that I was emotionally unstable, that I had a temper, that Marcus was holding the family together while I struggled, that she worried about the children. I asked Patrice if she believed it. Patrice looked at her coffee cup for a moment. Then she said, "I've never seen any of it, but she says it so consistently that people who don't know you have started to." I wrote it down when I got home, dated it, added it to the note. The second piece came from James's pediatrician, a routine appointment. The doctor mentioned, carefully and professionally, that she had received a call from a family member expressing concern about the home environment. She said she was required to document it, but had found no cause for concern in her examination. The family member had not left a name. I wrote it down. I added it to the note. The third piece was a conversation Marcus and I had in January of the year I filed, after a dinner at Beverly's that had ended badly. I said something I had been holding for 2 years. I said I felt like Beverly was running a campaign against me inside his family, and that I needed him to see it and address it. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She just worries. That's how she is." I looked at him across our kitchen and understood something I had been not understanding for years. Marcus was not going to see it, not because he was stupid, because seeing it required him to hold 2 things simultaneously: that his mother loved him and that his mother was causing harm. And that combination was not something his internal architecture had been built to support. I filed for divorce 4 months later. My attorney is a woman named Renata Solis. Family law, 16 years. The last 8 focused on custody disputes. She is direct in the way of someone who has learned that clarity is kinder than comfort in the long run, and she has the specific patience of a person who understands that the truth takes time to become visible, but is worth waiting for. She asked me in our first meeting how much documentation I had. I showed her the note, 18 months of it. Dated entries, exact quotes, Contexts: the pediatrician incident, Patrice's account, the fragments through the screen door. She read through it without expression. When she finished, she looked up. "This is a good start," she said. "But I want more. I want Patrice on the record. I want the pediatrician's documentation. I want anything else you can think of that establishes a pattern of narrative interference." "Narrative interference," I said. "Beverly has been building a story about you inside your husband's family for years. That story is going to show up in this custody proceeding. We need to get ahead of it with documentation that tells the real one." She paused. "I'm also going to recommend a guardian ad litem." A guardian ad litem, she explained, was an independent attorney appointed by the court to represent Zoe and James's interests specifically. Not mine, not Marcus's, the children's. The gal would conduct their own investigation, interview both parents, review relevant documentation, visit both homes, and submit an independent recommendation to the judge. "Beverly is going to be a problem in this proceeding," Renata said. "She's going to position herself as a concerned grandmother with relevant knowledge of your parenting. The gal is the counter to that, because the gal's job is the children's well-being, not the family's narrative." I thought about Zoe and James. Zoe, who arranged her stuffed animals in careful rows before bed and got upset if the order was wrong. James, who called clouds by the wrong names on purpose because he thought it was funny. "Find me the best one," I said. The guardian ad litem was a woman named Carol Whitfield. Retired family law attorney, 22 years on the bench before she transitioned to gal work. She was in her late 60s, compact, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a chain, and the specific, unhurried manner of someone who has sat in enough rooms to know that patience is not the same as passivity. She met with me twice. She met with Marcus 3 times. She visited both homes. She spoke with Zoe and James separately, in age-appropriate ways, in her office with toys and art supplies, and the non-threatening calm of someone who has spent decades making children feel safe enough to tell the truth. She also, I learned later, made 3 calls that I hadn't known to expect. The first was to Zoe's teacher, a woman named Ms. Patterson, who had had Zoe in her class for a full year and who had her own observations about certain things Zoe had said during the school day. Observations she had noted and not known what to do with until Carol Whitfield called. The second was to the pediatrician, Dr. Amara Hayes, who had documented the anonymous call about the home environment 14 months ago, and who confirmed, on the record, that she had found no cause for concern in either child across 5 years of care. The third was to Patrice. Patrice, who had sat across from me over coffee and told me what Beverly had been saying for 2 years, agreed to speak with Carol Whitfield. She told me afterward that the conversation had lasted 90 minutes. She said Carol had asked very specific questions and had taken very specific notes, and had thanked her for her honesty in the particular way of someone who has just received information that confirms something they already suspected. Carol Whitfield's report took 5 weeks. It was 17 pages. Renata called me when she received it and said to come in. I went in on a Wednesday morning. Renata set the report on the desk. I read it while she waited. Carol had found, across her full investigation, no evidence of instability, neglect, or unfitness in my parenting. She had found consistent, attentive, child-centered care across 5 years of documentation and direct observation. She had found 2 children who were securely attached to their mother, articulate about their needs, and thriving by every developmental measure she could apply. She had also found something else. In her interviews with Zoe, who was 6 and careful with her words in the way of children who have learned that words carry weight, Carol had noted language that didn't belong to a 6-year-old. Phrases about mommy being difficult, about daddy working hard while mommy was upset, about Grandma Beverly worrying about them. Carol's report described these as phrases consistent with adult-influenced narrative shaping in a child too young to understand the function of the language she was carrying. She had found Beverly's fingerprints in my daughter's vocabulary. I read that section twice. Then I set the report down and looked out Renata's window at the Wednesday city. She went after Zoe, I said. The report speaks to it carefully, Renata said. Carol doesn't use that language, but the documentation supports the conclusion. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, what happens now? We go to the hearing, Renata said, and we let Carol's report do what 17 pages of independent professional findings do in a courtroom. The hearing was on a Thursday in November. Family Court, 2nd floor, Judge Patricia O.C. presiding, 21 years on the bench. The kind of judge who has heard every version of every story and measures them by their internal consistency and the quality of the documentation behind them. Marcus arrived with his attorney, A man named Gerald Park, who was competent and prepared and working with a case that had, I could see from the way he carried his folders, become more complicated than he'd anticipated since Carol Whitfield's report had landed. Beverly arrived with Marcus. She was not a party to the proceeding. She was there as a support, which is allowed. She sat in the gallery behind Marcus's table in a navy suit and her church posture, hands folded, expression composed in the way of a woman who has decided the outcome and is waiting for the room to catch up. The hearing opened. Gerald Park made his opening statement. He outlined Marcus's position on custody, parenting time, the children's needs. He was measured and professional. Renata made her opening statement. She was quieter than Gerald, more precise. She told Judge Osei that the court would hear from Carol Whitfield and that Carol's findings would speak to both the children's well-being and the nature of the co-parenting environment they had been navigating. Judge Osei nodded. She had Carol's report already. I could see it in the stack on her bench, tabbed and annotated. Gerald Park called Marcus to speak. Marcus spoke about his relationship with Zoe and James. He was genuine. I want to say that clearly because it's true, and precision matters. Marcus is a good father. His failures in this proceeding were not failures of love. They were failures of vision. He loved his children completely and had allowed his mother to operate in the space around that love without fully understanding what she was doing in it. Then Beverly stood up. She didn't wait to be called. She simply stood in the gallery and addressed the judge directly. Judge Osei looked at her over her reading glasses. "Ma'am, you are not a party to this proceeding." "I'm the children's grandmother," Beverly said. Her voice was steady, rehearsed in the way of someone who has been preparing this moment. "I have direct knowledge of this woman's parenting, and I believe the court should hear it." Judge Osei looked at Renata. Renata looked at Carol Whitfield, who was seated at the table as the court's appointed gal. Carol opened her folder. She did it slowly. The deliberate slowness of someone who is not in a hurry because the documents are not going anywhere. She looked at Beverly, then at Judge Osei. Then she said, in the calm, measured tone of someone reading from a prepared statement, "Your Honor, I'd like to note for the record that during my investigation, I identified a pattern of external narrative influence on the minor children that I've documented in Section 4 of my report. I'd also like to note that the source of that influence, based on my interviews and the language patterns I observed in the elder child, appears consistent with regular contact from a specific adult outside the immediate family unit." She paused. She looked at Beverly. "I'd be happy to walk the court through my findings in detail if that would be useful." The gallery went very quiet. Judge Osei looked at Beverly over her reading glasses for a long moment. Then she said, "Ma'am, please sit down." Beverly sat down. Her composure was intact. She was too controlled for it not to be. But something behind it had shifted in the specific way things shift when a person understands that the room they thought they'd arranged has been arranged differently while they were looking the other way. Gerald Park leaned toward Marcus and said something I couldn't hear. Marcus looked at the table. The ruling came 6 days later. "I won't give you every detail because some of it belongs to my children and not to this story. What I can tell you is the shape of it. Primary physical custody with me. Liberal parenting time for Marcus, structured and consistent because Zoe and James love their father, and that love is real and worth protecting. A formal co-parenting order requiring both parties to refrain from negative or leading statements about the other parent in the children's presence. And a specific provision, rare enough that Renata told me she'd seen it fewer than 10 times in 16 years, restricting Beverly Okafor's unsupervised contact with the minor children pending completion of a family therapy program, designed to address what the court's order described as inappropriate boundary violations in her relationship with the minor children. Beverly's attorney filed an objection. Judge Osei denied it in 4 sentences. Marcus called me 2 weeks after the ruling. I answered because we have children together, and because answering is what you do when you have children together regardless of everything else. He was quiet for a moment after I said hello. Then he said, "I didn't know she called the pediatrician." "I know," I said. "I didn't know about Zoe, what Carol found, the language." He stopped. "I didn't know she was doing that." I believed him. That's the complicated part. I believed him completely, and it didn't change what had happened, and both of those things were true at the same time. "I know you didn't," I said. Another silence. Longer. "I'm sorry," he said, "for not seeing it sooner. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't okay. I said, the kids need both of us paying attention now. That's what matters." He said he understood. We talked for 4 more minutes about Zoe's upcoming school play and James's new thing where he refused to eat anything orange, and then we said goodbye. I sat in my kitchen after and thought about Beverly in that courtroom, standing up without being called, certain that the room was hers the way rooms had always been hers. Watching Carol Whitfield open a folder with the slow, deliberate patience of someone who has 17 pages of independent professional findings and no reason to hurry. Beverly had spent 4 years building a story. Carol Whitfield had spent 5 weeks reading the actual one. It is February now. Zoe is in her school play. She has 3 lines and has been practicing them at dinner every night for 2 weeks, with the focused intensity of a person who understands that 3 lines are 3 lines, and they deserve full commitment. James has started eating orange things again, quietly, without acknowledging the previous policy, in the specific way of 4-year-olds who change their minds and decline to explain themselves. I watch them at the dinner table on the evenings they're with me and feel the particular quiet of something that is still healing, but is not broken. Beverly and I have no contact. That is not a dramatic statement. It is just what's true right now. Marcus and I are learning to co-parent the way you learn anything worth learning. Imperfectly, incrementally, with occasional backsliding and general forward motion. Renata sent me a note after the ruling. 1 line. You documented your way to the truth. That's the hardest and most important thing. I keep it on my desk. Carol Whitfield I thanked in person. I sat across from her in her office and tried to find the right words for what it meant that she had read my daughter's vocabulary and understood what she was carrying. Carol listened the way she listens to everything, completely and without hurry. When I finished, she said, "Your daughter is going to be fine. She's already putting down what doesn't belong to her. Children do that when the environment is safe enough to let them." I drove home and sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. Then I went in and listened to Zoe practice her 3 lines. She has them perfect. She's had them perfect for a week. She just likes the practicing. So here's the thing about Beverly that I think gets missed in a story like this. She wasn't wrong that she loved those children. She genuinely did. The problem is that love without boundaries isn't actually love in the way children need it. It's possession dressed up as devotion. And the most dangerous version of that is when it's deployed with enough sophistication that the person doing it has convinced themselves they're the most loving person in the room. Beverly stood up in that courtroom because she had never once in her life been in a room that didn't eventually arrange itself around her. She had managed information in her family for decades. She had shaped narratives, redirected conversations, built cases against people she saw as threats without ever raising her voice or showing her hand. She was good at it. She was very good at it. And then Carol Whitfield opened a folder. The lesson here isn't about divorce strategy or custody law. It's about what happens to children when the adults around them treat them as territory. Zoe was 6 years old and she was carrying vocabulary that didn't belong to her. That's not a footnote. That's the whole case. Document everything. Find the Carol Whitfields. And pay attention to the words your children bring home. They'll tell you everything you need to know.